Supply chain management goes extreme. Joining us for this week's Smith Business Close-Up is Sandor Boyson, research professor and co-director of the Supply Chain Management Center and editor of the new book, Extreme Supply Chain Management. Thanks for being with us, Professor.
You're welcome.
So let's talk about what we're talking about here. It used to be if you were running a factory and making, say, cars, you would want to have a big stockpile of all of the raw materials necessary, and then that thinking changed. Is that correct?
As we began to globalize our supply chains and work with more and more companies across Asia and across Latin America and Europe, more opportunities came to share the risks of managing a global supply chain. A global supply chain is really a group of companies who are committed to working together to plan, to design, to manufacture, to distribute, and to deliver to the end customer the product that that customer really wants. So it's really about an ecosystem working together to share the risks of managing inventory, managing the financial resources across the supply chain, etc.
What's an example of that? I'm thinking of like maybe Airbus. Is that what we're talking about?
Airbus is a good example, yes, and Airbus, as you know, is a very complex supply chain involved in aerospace. So there may be literally thousands of suppliers working together on components that get bundled together by the systems integrator, and that result in an integrated product, the Airbus, delivered to their customers.
Okay, so when we're talking about extreme supply chain management, what are we talking about?
Well, the financial crisis that hit in 2008 was really more than just a financial crisis. It was a world supply chain crisis. In the first 9 months of the crisis we've been experiencing, world trade dropped at a steeper level and a faster decline than during the first 9 months of the Great Depression. So managers were confronted with dealing with managing a supply chain of unusual, unpredictable amplitude and frequency of interruption. Managers had never encountered this degree of unpredictability before in their supply chains. And part of the reason was that the supply chain itself is a carrier mechanism. It not only responds to risk, it not only responds to disruption, but it's like a nerve pathway that can feed volatility from one end of the world to another very, very quickly. So for example, we had a backup of ships in Chesapeake Bay waiting to unload in Baltimore, at the port of Baltimore, but there were really no customers as demand across the U.S. dropped so dramatically. Further out, off the coast of Singapore, was an armada of ghost ships similarly with unwanted goods, and that armada at the peak of the crisis equaled the combined numbers of ships of both the U.S. and the British navies. So this is how quickly a drop in the demand, particularly in the U.S., affected the worldwide supply chain.
So what lessons do professionals in this field take from that event? Do you look at that and that was a one-time thing? Hopefully we won't see it again for another 80 years, or does that then create ongoing concerns?
I think the latter. I think the general indication now is that this volatility is going to be ongoing. It's systemic. It's embedded in the ongoing operations of supply chains. And so managers have to rethink their received common wisdom, the common sense that they received about how to run a supply chain in more stable conditions that no longer exist. And by that I mean, let's take one example, the notion of how do you forecast demand in a supply chain. Formerly, we were told that there's a widespread phenomena called the bullwhip effect, and that is each player along the supply chain continues to add additional safety inventory or safety stock so that that actor won't run out of inventory as demand increases. So there's a built-in bias towards increasing demand on the supply chain. What we're finding right now, however, is that demand has, in many cases, evaporated or become so unpredictable that you don't want to overorder. You don't want to be left holding inventory. So the exact opposite phenomena takes hold, or underordering to hoard cash. And this is a fundamental difference in the supply chain prior to the crisis and the supply chain that we're dealing with right now.
How important is this for the types of businesses that we're talking about? I mean, is this little things on the margin, or just how big a deal is it?
Well, we think it's a very, very big deal. If you talk to some of the major multinationals operating out of the U.S., they will tell you that in March 2009, household names, brand names, had a week left of cash in which to manage their business and their supply chains. They, in their whole history, have never experienced this degree of terror, I think would be the right word. And as a result, we had a suspended animation occur in supply chains where everything was designed to hoard cash. So now, for example, you see a lot of under-ordering of inventory. You see, as companies look to manage their networks globally, a bias towards leasing as opposed to sunk costs and investing in things like warehouses. So there's a real, I think, shift in the common sense that's unfolding. And the book that we wrote was really designed to crystallize that new common sense for managing supply chains in an era of extreme, unprecedented volatility.
All right, and the book is Extreme Supply Chain Management, a guide to mastering business volatility. Sandy Boyson joining us from the Smith School. Sir, thank you for your time.
Oh, you're most welcome.